Hi, everyone. This is Joni McGarry. Thank you so much for tuning in. My guest today is Dr. Meryl Nass. Dr. Nass is a physician, a researcher, a writer, and an advocate, and she has a depth of knowledge across many different subject areas. I've asked her to speak to me today about the crisis in American farming and how federal and state policies contribute to the obstacles that farmers face and what their status is today, and why we should be concerned for our national food security and also for our farming way of life in this country. We're going to talk about the status of the current farm bill as well. I also asked Meryl to give me her thoughts on the current headlines about the hantavirus outbreak and the Ebola virus outbreak. What might be behind the fear-mongering in those headlines and what the actual risk is that people ought to be concerned about, or more importantly, ought not to be concerned about. So you want to stay tuned for that part of the conversation as well. But before we get to the show, let me tell you a little bit about Crowd Health and why I ditched health insurance this year. I was paying a fortune for coverage, and I was tired of being part of a broken system. So I joined Crowd Health instead, and I'm really glad I did. Crowd Health isn't insurance. It's a crowdfunding platform where members fund each other's medical expenses. You pay $60 a month to be a member, and then once a month, you're asked to help cover another member's bill. You know upfront what the maximum ask every month will be, and most months it's less than that. I am literally saving thousands of dollars this year. In 5 years, Crowd Health has funded 99.9% of all funding requests. So I'm saving thousands, and I actually feel covered. To join, you just need to be under 65 and reasonably healthy. There are no enrollment periods and no waiting. So go to joincrowdhealth.com and use code JONI, Joni, and get a discount on your first 3 months. The link's in the show notes. Now let's get to the show. Hi, Meryl. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Joni. It's really great to be here. I'm glad to spend this time with you.
Me too. It's good to see you. Right as we started, it started to thunder here. So I hope we don't get too much lightning here in Indiana. We have bad thunderstorms. So welcome to the show. And I'm excited to talk to you today about a couple of areas where you are quite expert. One is the plight of farmers in this country and the pressures that shape their existence. And then we'll wrap up with some discussion on the virus landscape right now and how we're getting hit with lots of news about some different outbreaks here and there. And I'd love to get your wisdom on that. But first, let's talk about the farm situation in this country. You sent me a really great informative slideshow. And to pull the camera back, it just seems like farms are in crisis. They're in trouble at a macro level. And so maybe we could just start there. What is the landscape of the American farmer right now, the independent family farm?
So things are so dire for farmers that from my perspective, you have to feel like this had to be, if not planned, at least very acceptable to the powers that be, whoever the powers that be are, because we've been in this crisis for at least 5 years and it's just getting worse. And even though Trump said he loved farmers and farmers voted for him overwhelmingly there. And I was very hopeful at the beginning of the administration that we could identify what the problems were and start turning them around. In fact, none of that has happened. There have been 2 major bills that have to do with farming in the United States. One is called the Farm Bill. And this past year, the other one was called the One Big Beautiful Bill, which had a lot of the money, hundreds of billions of dollars that are spent for farm commodities, for SNAP, which is the new name for food stamps, and for a number of other, there are about 8 other so-called nutrition programs that the federal government pays for. And so some of that money goes to buy, foodstuffs from American farmers. And so that is a help. Then we have other subsidies for farmers that the federal government pays, and we have something called crop insurance, which was designed so that if a crop failed, a farmer could take out insurance, and the federal government would actually pay the majority of the cost of that insurance. And then the farmer could collect if the crop did not bring in the money it should have.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's happened with all these programs over the years is that they have gone to basically incentivize and support and enrich the very largest farmers, and they do virtually nothing for the small farmers. And small farmers make up 98% of the farmers in the United States. And so the result is that normally we have a farm bill every 5 years, and that specifies how money will be spent on farming and food commodities for the next 5 to 10 years. And it's a huge bill. It's hundreds of billions of dollars, almost $1 trillion. And so the last one was 2018 that it got passed. And since 2023, when it should have been passed again, Congress either hasn't put a bill out there or hasn't managed to pass one. Now, the House voted on a version of the Farm Bill last month, and so it passed with a lot of acrimonious discussion. Now, because it's a have to pass bill, and they've just been sort of kicking the can down the road for the last 3 years, it's normally a bipartisan bill, and both sides contribute and sort of come to an agreement ahead of time. In this case, that didn't happen. The Dems were very unhappy about cuts to food stamps, large cuts, and other things, including, which made me very unhappy, the attempt to give a liability shield to pesticides in general. So everything that is used on crops, not so pesticides, in common parlance, a pesticide is something to kill a pest. Mm-hmm. But in the parlance of the USDA and the Environmental Protection Agency, a pesticide includes herbicides, rodenticides, everything to kill rats or squirrels, or it's a large number, thousands of chemicals, including glyphosate, which, as the audience knows, we have most genetically modified seeds have been modified to make them resistant to glyphosate. So you could spray glyphosate.
Commercially known as Roundup. It's Roundup, like Roundup Ready seeds.
So, right. So Roundup, actually, we used to think Roundup was glyphosate, but nowadays Roundup is a lot of different mixtures of things. And for the gardener, there is no glyphosate anymore in the Roundup products you can buy at Home Depot or the garden store. And that changed a couple of years ago because of all these lawsuits against Monsanto Bayer. So Bayer bought Monsanto, which had developed all these seeds and glyphosate. And a few months after they bought it, it turned out that plaintiffs suing Monsanto, then suing Bayer, for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in particular, and a few other things, but mainly non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a cancer of the blood and solid immune organs, started winning cases. And because they got huge payouts on the basis that Monsanto and Bayer knew about this potential injury and hid it from the public. So juries were angry, here's Monsanto giving people cancer when they're just trying to grow a garden.
Right. And they knew that there was danger.
And they knew, so it was alleged. And so many lawsuits were won, although there were also a number that were lost. But what it meant was the lawyers started looking, right? There were ambulance chasers. So they started looking for people who had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma that could become plaintiffs against Monsanto Bayer. And they wound up with nearly 200,000 plaintiffs. So if you imagine each one getting $1 million, you're talking about, $200 billion. And right. Monsanto was sold for $63 billion. It would put Bayer out of business if they had to pay off all of these people at the rate that these legal cases
Mhm.
were being settled for. So Bayer anyway put up a huge attempt. They spent about $10 billion, or they spent billions anyway, on trying to fight this. And they did it all different ways. So at least 6 different ways. They went to the states and asked the states to pass laws, and 2 have done that already, passed laws saying that the state can't have a more restrictive rule on the pesticide labeling that other than what is already on the federally approved label. So basically, in those 2 states, you cannot sue Bayer Monsanto anymore because the state has said, yeah, you can't bring in evidence apart from what's on the label to show what the potential injuries are. They went to the Supreme Court, asked the Supreme Court to overturn one of these victories. They went to Congress and got riders put into the Farm Bill and into the Appropriations Bill, 2 different bills written a little differently in each case, but each of them, if passed, would have basically given a massive liability shield to all pesticides. So nobody could sue anywhere in the United States on the basis of any information that was different than what's on the EPA label. You might think that's okay, but the EPA is a bought agency. And so the EPA higher-ups have sort of suppressed the scientists at the EPA. That right now, even under the Trump administration, you've got basically lobbyists running the EPA for the chemical and pesticide industry and other industries that it regulates. So there's no real regulation at EPA. So and Bayer Monsanto and the other pesticide companies seem to think that they're going to be able to continue that.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, as long as they can restrict everybody to what's on the EPA approved label, they're going to be okay.
So in that label, well, I have 2 questions. That label would not warn or might
Correct.
Would not warn consumers. And then the second thing is that, and my question is, has this always been a part of a farm bill?
No.
So
never before.
Okay, so then it's throwing another wrench into the fact that things need to get passed for the farmers, and they're not able to get passed without this controversy because of this chemical issue, which seems to me very industry driven.
Right. Yes, so absolutely. So this is very controversial. It actually was passed in the appropriations bill by the committee. And by the way, the committee members were lied to about what it means. The language was made very confusing.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, they were told that it meant one thing and it meant something else. It passed the committee, but at the last minute, I guess, the leadership of the Republican Party took it out of the appropriations bill. They knew it was going to find its way into the farm bill anyway. Mm-hmm. But I think that the members were not, we managed to raise so much public awareness. Mm-hmm. People were calling their members, and the members did not want to be on record as voting for a bill that is going to give pesticides the same immunity that vaccine makers have. I mean, everybody's angry about the vaccine, the fact that you can't sue for COVID injuries because of immunity. So why would we give that to all the chemical companies? It's an invitation to making your products more dangerous and more sloppy.
Right. It's a moral hazard.
There's
no incentive to make the product safe. How does something like this get into a farm bill, though? That's, I guess, my question. Shouldn't it be a separate issue? And is it slowing things down to help farmers?
So if you're Bayer and they're bought members of Congress, of whom the head of the Ag Committee is one, you want to put your rider into a must-pass bill, right? So the appropriations bill was a must-pass, and the farm bill is a must-pass. And so you lobby, whatever that means. I would say it often means bribe. You do what needs to be done using lobbyists, and you make sure that it gets tucked into the bill. The bill gets shown to the other members of that committee only like a couple of weeks before it gets voted on. So, although, as I said, normally there's a fairly bipartisan process for the Farm Bill, there was much less of one this time, and the appropriations too. So the Dems really have complained that they were cut out. So they were given this complicated bill, it's hundreds and hundreds of pages, and they have to deal with it. And so they pick their battles.
Sure.
Anyway, so the pesticide liability shield has stayed. Sorry, it was so. It's complicated. There were a number of sections, so apologies. So the worst part, well, I don't know if it was the worst part, but the part that specifically said courts can't take into account any information except what's on the label.
Mhm.
That part was taken out of the Farm Bill in order to pass it in the House. However, there were other riders that had been inserted that made it very difficult for the EPA to improve a label. So, for instance, the label for glyphosate we're dealing with a label from about 1992 on glyphosate. So, and it's supposed to be reviewed about every 15 years. When EPA, they always delay, and so they delayed, and then they came up with another review, and it was challenged. It was legally challenged. It was a poor quality review that was going to let glyphosate label get away with things and not account for the evidence. So a court ordered the EPA to redo that label and review, and it should have been done by now. And the court gave them until this year to redo it, which is still, 30 plus years later, still not, they haven't finished it.
Amazing.
And so one of these sections in the Farm Bill that got put in was to delay that process for another 5 years. And there were other things that were put in that would actually take some authority away from the EPA administrator and give it to the USDA secretary, which is odd. Apparently, the industry thought they would have even better control of the USDA than which they have, historically, than they might have of the EPA. So anyway, the pesticide liability shield is the worst, or some of the sections are gone, but trying to emasculate regulation at the level of the EPA is still in there. And we don't know what the Senate will pass. So in the House, the Farm Bill only had to pass by a 50% majority, and it passed, by a small majority.
Mm-hmm.
But in the Senate, it has to pass by 60 votes. So they can only lose 40 votes. And yet the Democrats have about 47 members in the Senate. And so the whole bill needs to be made amenable to more Democrats in order to pass it. So we don't know yet what it's going to look like. But in any event, what we do know is in the One Big Beautiful bill and in the Farm Bill that the House passed, small farmers are being screwed again. Basically, all this tremendous amount of money, that hundreds of billions of dollars that are spent on subsidies for farmers of various types, again, very complicated, lots of parts, but almost all of it goes to the big farmers. And okay, so what's the result? Since 2007, between 2017 and 2024, the United States lost 160,000 farms. They went under.
Mm-hmm.
That is 63 farms a day were lost in that 7-year period. And the number of farms of all sizes got reduced, except for the very largest farms, because the big farmers had the money to buy up land from these small farmers who are going under. So farms that are over 5,000 acres in size, that number got bigger, but everything else got smaller.
And the reason for farms that size going under, I mean, just to note it, there are so many pressures on the prices of things they have to purchase to farm, the debt that they're in for the equipment they have, the fact that the trade deficits now in this country are different with farming, and we don't export as much food as we used to, and we import a lot of food. So there are a lot of pressures on the money they're getting from their crops. And then add that to the fact that a lot of younger generations of these farmers don't want to go into farming, or they're unable to make a living doing it.
Right.
So, and I'm sure more things contributed to that as well, but those are major forces on those farms, correct?
Absolutely, and it's all getting worse because between 2020 and 2024 or five, the price of all the inputs, that term inputs is what is used when you talk about farming.
Mhm.
So that means the tractors, the chemicals, the seeds, the fertilizer, everything they needed went up between 30 and 40%. And now we're looking about at just this year, fertilizer and other chemicals and the diesel they're going to need for their tractors, they're all going up about 50% or even more because of the
Mhm.
Strait of Hormuz.
Right.
Well, maybe that, and one wonders, was that the plan? Was that just, was surely Trump knew that this was going to happen if he decided to go into a war against Iran. It had been warned about for many years that they would shut off the Strait of Hormuz. And surely he knew, somebody knew in the US government what that meant in terms of sulfur, sulfuric acid, phosphorus, and everything else. So anyway, farmers are facing that, and so there's a lot of land that isn't being planted this year because they haven't been making money on their crops in the past. So for the last 5 years, livestock farmers have all lost money. They've lost money. It actually costs them more to raise a cow than they've earned. Now there was one year where there was such a supply crush, like last year,
Mhm.
that if you did have cows, you could make a lot of money on them
Right.
because there was such a shortage. But for the 4 or 5 years before that, they were losing money on their livestock. And if you were growing crops like corn or soy, you were just making a pittance, like $5,000 to $10,000 a year per farm, So the farms were surviving based on one member of the family going out, having a real job,
Right.
another job where they could bring in money and keep the farm afloat. So basically, farming has become a hobby.
Well, an unprofitable, exhausting, hard work hobby.
Exactly.
It's demoralizing, and it's also endangering our food security in this country, and also our supply of healthy foods. Let me go back to the cattle situation. People who are raising livestock, part of the challenge that they're facing, and this will tie into the prime part of the Farm Bill and what was just passed in New Hampshire, is a lot of these livestock producers, well, they can't slaughter their own animals and sell the product. They have to go through a lot of hoops that are inefficient, increase their costs, and doesn't necessarily make a safer product for the public. And that costs them a lot of money, and it makes their farms much less profitable. Can you talk a little bit about that legislative landscape and what might be changing there?
Yeah, thank you. So in 1967, a law was passed and for the sale of meat in the U.S., and the USDA imposed restrictions on the sale of meat that had not been present previously. They had restrictions already. There already were federal inspectors, but basically the USDA took over from the states and said, okay, some states had their own inspectors in meat processing plants. And USDA said, okay, you can keep that, but your inspections have to be at least as rigorous as ours are specified to be, whether or not they really are. And so, apart from that, the only meat that can be actually sold legally in the United States has to have been slaughtered in a facility with a USDA inspector on site at that time. And and there aren't so many of them. There's a shortage of these inspection facilities.
Right.
Inspected facilities. There's a shortage of inspectors. And in fact, USDA is spending hundreds of millions of dollars giving the money away to meat packers to expand their processing facilities so there will be enough. So ranchers sometimes, depending where they're located, may have to book a spot at a slaughterhouse up to 2 years in advance, even before the cow is born. Yes, it's remarkable. And then they have to put their cows or their livestock on a truck. The truck has to then drive sometimes hundreds of miles to get to a USDA inspected slaughterhouse. Then they may have to wait days before the animals can be slaughtered. Is someone feeding them, watering them, taking care of them? It's very stressful for the animals. And then this is the meat we get. Well, the other thing that happened is that a much larger amount of meat is coming across the border, particularly from Mexico and Central America. So that
is that a relatively new phenomenon, Meryl?
So it's not new, but the percentage of meat that is coming from overseas has increased a lot. So about 25% of all ground beef is imported in the United States. And some of the meat is coming from Australia and New Zealand. It's grass-fed, it's good meat, but some of it is coming from Mexico and El Salvador. And, we don't really, where there are screwworms and other pests that aren't in the United States, and we don't really know. And because of World Trade Organization rules, it has been impossible legally to actually label meat. You can't label your meat and say it's grown in the United States. Up until now, for the last so many years, 5 or 10 years, you could not, when you're in the grocery store, you can't tell whether the meat is from Mexico or from the US or from New Zealand. Some of that is changing now. So now we can have, now we're allowed to have voluntary labeling, where if the meat is grown in the US, you can put that stamp on your meat now, for the first time this year in a number of years. But if it was grown in Mexico, nobody's requiring you to put that stamp on the meat. So it just doesn't say, and consumers won't know. Okay, so what's happened? The United States used to be a breadbasket. We had this vast Midwest with beautiful, land, lots of topsoil, flat, great. And we would sell food to the rest of the world. Well, right now, last year, we imported $50 billion worth of food more than we exported. We have become a net food importer in the United States in the last 10 years. And this is crazy because it's very bad for food security. What happens if supply chains go down again? We won't be able to produce enough.
And you can't just turn that spigot on overnight.
No.
What contributed to that change from us exporting and being able to feed ourselves to now relying on imports from other countries?
So there are many things. So the row crops, which are corn, soy, wheat, they have, it's been half the years, for the last 15 years, half the years, you could not get a price for corn that was equal to what it cost to grow the corn. So for half the time, you would lose money on your corn crop. And I don't remember the numbers for wheat and for rice and for cotton, but they have not done well. So there's less and less acreage going into those products because they haven't been profitable. If you have crop insurance, good, you'll be able to. And so the U.S. government a couple of years ago paid 62% of the cost of crop insurance. The farmer only had to pay 38%. So,
but that's just for very large farms, and it comes with a lot of
large farms.
It comes with strings attached, like you have to use perhaps glyphosate. You have to use glyphosate. Like you can't really manage your own farm. So the farm insurance is really not for most people.
Exactly.
They don't qualify. Yeah.
They don't qualify. It requires a lot of paperwork. It's set up basically to keep the little guy out. And if you grow a variety of, you need crop insurance you need a different policy for every crop you grow. So if you're growing tomatoes and cucumbers and lettuce and radishes, you can't get a policy for, it's just too much paperwork. and too
You need a
expensive and
full-time farm
costly. Yeah,
administrator just to write policy. So
exactly.
yeah, that doesn't work.
So anyway, and at the same time, you can, because we have to pay farm workers, a minimum wage in the United States. And in most places there, you have to, even if they're foreign farm workers who come in seasonally, you have to pay them legally at the same rate as a US worker, which would be at least $14 or $15 an hour. Well, what does a farm worker earn in Mexico? Maybe $2 an hour.
Sure.
So it's going to be, right, cheaper.
Mhm.
And then the other thing is, so there's been consolidation in all of these industries, particularly in meat. So the top 4 beef companies in the United States control 85% of the beef market. So they are a cartel, essentially. They
Wow.
can control prices, and they control the prices the ranchers get. So they squeeze the ranchers, right? And then they work directly with the groceries, and the groceries are also, monopolies,
Right.
cartels, basically. So they, can make good money. And all of this good money that they make has enabled the consolidation in these industries, enabled the, grocers to buy the small grocers, meat packers to buy the small meat packers. 2.5 of the 4 top meat packers are foreign owned for
That's
beef.
that's
Yeah.
concerning.
So that's concerning for food security. And for ethics. The 2 owners of the biggest beef company in the US and in the world, JBS, have both spent time in jail in Brazil, which is where they're from, for bribery and other corrupt practices. And yet they're allowed to conduct business in the United States, and they probably do it the same way here. The biggest pork producer in the United States is Smithfield Farms, and in 2013,
Mhm.
they were bought up by China. So again, the largest pork producer in the U.S. is foreign, and these are things we should be concerned about. Also, for people from foreign countries, including China and Canada and many others, have been buying up farmland in the
Yes.
U.S. because it's relatively cheap compared to, say, farmland in Europe. And there have been attempts at the state level to ban the sale of farmland
Mhm.
to foreign entities, but Trump just came out today and said, no, we're not going to stop that. We want foreign ownership of U.S. farmland.
That makes no sense to me, at all. I mean, if you look at it straight on its face, that you have people in the country, administrators who care about the country. So that doesn't make any sense. In that case, a state cannot override the federal rule.
So we've got all these problems now about the 10th Amendment, which said, the 10th Amendment, is from the 1780s.
We still have a
The
constitution.
federal government doesn't have authority over the states on
Right.
any issue unless it's specified in the Constitution that this is a federal authority. Well, that's been ignored ever since, basically. And
Yeah.
so even authorities that you would think would be within the state, such as we can pass a law that foreigners can't buy farmland or foreigners can't buy land near a military base. The feds are our members of Congress pass laws that preempt these state laws. So they've just done that in the farm bill that passed the House.
Oh, so
They
this was
preempt
in that one.
sorry,
This farm bill
the farm
specified
bill
that,
that was just passed last month by the House only, not the Senate yet.
right?
That had a preemption where California had passed a law that said growing pigs in crates where they have to spend their entire life in a crate, they can't move around, they can't walk, they can't anything, is now going to be illegal. You can't sell meat from these pigs in California, whether it comes from out of state or in state. The pig has to have so many square feet to walk around, and it wasn't very many, but enough.
Mm-hmm.
And that opened up a market for small hog farmers in California because
Yes.
the large industrial CAFOs, which had cornered the market, now were being asked to provide space that they didn't have. And so the farmers that did have space could then start competing. And so it was really good for hog farmers. And so in the Farm Bill now, our so-called elected representatives who are supposed to be looking out for us passed a law that preempted this, which means California doesn't have the right to pass such a law. And so they've gotten rid of this California law, essentially, to allow pigs to walk around before they're slaughtered for food. But not only that, it preempted hundreds of other state laws that were designed for animal welfare purposes or for the health and safety of citizens. So the feds keep
What a terrible precedent.
encroaching on
Yes.
areas that you would have thought were state right issues.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's going to be one of the biggest political issues of our time is what are the authorities of the federal government as opposed to the states? And the American people need to become aware that this is just a huge, huge, huge issue. Okay, so now let me answer part of your question, which was what's going on at the state and federal level to try to turn some of this around. And there are two important bills. One that Thomas Massie, who of course is our most brave member of Congress,
Who has the
primary tomorrow. So
yes.
if you are in his district in Kentucky, please get out the vote for him. We need him desperately. Thomas Massie has been trying for years, and finally this year they put it into the Farm Bill, his bill called the Prime Act, which would start to give states more authority over the sale of meat. And what the Prime Act would do is allow states, if they wish, to designate 5 small what they're called custom slaughterhouses without USDA inspectors to process meat in the state. And they could sell it directly, or the farmer whose animal it is could sell it directly to consumers. And the thought is the consumer will know the farmer or know the small slaughterhouse, know what they're getting, and they don't need a USDA inspector. And the state can inspect however the state wants to make sure that because the state will designate custom slaughterhouses to be part of the program, only up to 5 in each state, that the state thinks do very high quality work. Okay, so that's the plan. And then in 2 years, if this works out, states can designate another 5, a total of 10. And hopefully we'll see that the food is just as safe and nutritious as it was before. And we can start, managing without USDA inspection as a bottleneck. It's a bottleneck. It is a mechanism by which, monopolies have sprung up in the processing of meat and processing and sales. Okay.
I will say that we buy all of our meat from one local farmer who processes at probably such a place, but we have to do it in some kind of membership arrangement. The farmer can't sell the meat to the grocery, in certain ways here. I mean, that might be changing in Indiana, but we have never had a foodborne illness issue. And I would argue that the meat is better, fresher. And
you know where it comes from.
I know where it comes from. And so it's not such a crazy idea. And we probably used to do it this way all the time.
Right. And it's probably grass-fed and hay-fed rather than, grain finished, which makes it better.
I just want to make that point that it's not such a far out idea. And the fact that we have to do baby steps with a pilot program is so telling about where we are right now. But fortunately, I hope that will pass the Senate. If it doesn't, will that be dead on the arrival? Will the Prime Act not be able to go through?
I think because the Republicans are desperate for Democrats to go along, it's very likely it will pass. It will stay in the bill and pass the Senate, but there's no guarantees. And what you're talking about is something that the USDA allows, as long as you buy a portion of meat, like you buy a fifth, and it depends on the state you're in. It's only certain states. But if you can buy like a quarter of a cow or a tenth of a cow in some states while the cow is alive, and then you are an owner, so it doesn't need to be USDA inspected because you're just getting your own meat back.
Right.
But you can't buy that quarter of a cow after it's been slaughtered.
Right.
You can only buy it while it's still alive and it becomes yours, Anyway, so that is something. Now the other thing that happened is New Hampshire, which has the "Live Free or Die" slogan. They brought up in the House a bill to allow very small farms to butcher or use a custom slaughterhouse to butcher their own animals and sell them to the public, as long as it was no more than 3 cows a month per farm, or equivalent. So 3 cows, 5 pigs, 10 lambs or sheep or goats. And so that passed. Now this is against federal policy. This is against USDA policy, but they passed it anyway in New Hampshire in the House, and they've passed it now in the Senate 13 days ago. And they changed the language a little, so now it has to go back to the House, but it passed with a 2/3 vote before, so it should have no problem. And then it will go to the governor for signing. And then New Hampshire will have challenged the USDA, saying, look, we think, we can do this without your USDA inspections. In fact, a local slaughterhouse with a USDA inspector just closed, that a lot of people in southern New Hampshire, there's only 4 in the whole state now that are USDA inspected slaughterhouses. So people can't get in. They can't get an appointment to have their animals slaughtered. Anyway, so it will be very interesting that with the Prime Act, how will the USDA respond? The state of Maine tried something similar but different 7 years ago, and USDA came in and said, look, if you persist with this, we are shutting down your state inspections. We're going to just end them. And so Maine capitulated, and even though they had passed a constitutional amendment and a law allowing food sovereignty of all types of food, they had to take meat out of it and give the authority over meat back to USDA. So they didn't shut down the state inspections. Now, New Hampshire has no state inspections. So that's a particular club that USDA cannot wield, but I'm sure they have other clubs, because all these federal agencies give the states money. And so if you do something they don't like, they withhold the money. And so that's usually a big enough club that people go along, states go along.
What's the justification on the part of the USDA, on the part of the USDA to shut something like this down, rather than to work with the state to, if they're concerned about food safety, to equip them with the tools and the education, which I think they probably already are expert in, to make the product safe or acceptable to the USDA? Why, what do you make of their combative nature in wanting to shut them down? Is it industry capture, or is it regulatory capture? Is it a mindset? It doesn't make any sense, really, if you attribute to people good intentions, which I don't.
Yeah, so you have to realize that these agencies are captured by industry and lobbyists. I'm told that that agencies never give up any power that they have. So when they're told they're in charge of meat, we're going to stay in charge of meat.
Everywhere, all the time.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we're going to ask Congress for more money so we can do it better.
Do you think that this new law in New Hampshire will go the same way that the pig walking around space law, the not having pigs in cages in California? Do you think there's a possibility that could get preempted as well?
Absolutely. I think that USDA will definitely want to get rid of that law, and that there will be a battle. I am aware that there's already a sort of test case that's been set up to deal with the legal issues. But I have I think a fabulous idea, which is, let's encourage a number of other states to do exactly the same thing, because they're in the same boat. Their ranchers don't have enough slaughterhouses either. Meat is very expensive in every state. You don't know what you're getting, and you want to know where your meat comes from. And so if we get 5 or 10 states to do something similar, it'll be much harder for USDA to go after them. And so I think that would be a great way to go. And maybe your audience would like to start calling, the Department of Agriculture, the governor, the, the representatives and senators in your state and suggest that this is get one of the reps or senators to bring a bill like this. Now you have the language that New Hampshire has already passed, and you can just introduce that in your state, and let's see if we can, we the people can start to turn this around.
I'll put that bill in the show notes so that the language will be available for that. So do you think any of this has to do with, just another layer, the push towards sustainable development goals and the goal to have 30% of all land under conservation to squeeze out maybe lots of different landholders? Is there any push from like the UN agenda goals that are putting pressure on our farmland and our national food security and on small farmers?
So absolutely, under Biden, there was, they didn't call it sustainable development goals. They had other names for it, but they were trying to put lots of land under conservation easements in the United States. And the way that happens is you basically inveigle farmers to agree, oh yeah, give me some money. There's federal money, often through the Farm Bill, and we will use these conservation practices in our land. And it sounds like a win-win for the farmer and for Americans. We're going to keep the water supply cleaner, blah, blah, blah. But what happens is sometimes in the fine print, what the farmer is signing and doesn't realize it is basically a lien such that conservation organizations, NGOs, like the World Wildlife Fund or Nature Conservancy, will actually be given the right to, and I'm not sure if they purchase that right or if it's given to them, they will be the middlemen. And these organizations were, by the way, formed by globalists way back. Right. They will have the right to tell the farmer going forward what conservation practices he or she must do. And if those are sufficiently restrictive, the value of the land goes down, right? If they say, well, you can't grow pigs anymore because they're contaminating the water supply. Okay, so now you can't grow pigs. Well, what else are you going to, and maybe you can't grow something else. So this, again, they don't talk about sustainable development goals in the United States, but this is what was happening. And under Biden, they were trying to expand a conservation area in Texas to 10 times its current size. Now, Trump has stopped a lot of this, but that I don't know what that means. I mean, I'm not sure. Trump may not be aligned with the globalists that were pushing these things under the Biden agenda, but he's certainly aligned with globalism in many other ways. Right. Like the flock cameras and this constant surveillance. His a different version of censorship, different kinds of corruption. So I think that the Europeans are suffering because they've somehow managed to pull the wool over their eyes regarding sustainable development goals there. And here we just call these things by different names, but we are still, the underlying premise is you get as much control over the population as possible. You keep adding to requirements. I'll give you a stupid example. I was driving around Maine and New Hampshire a lot this weekend, and 3 times I went through a toll booth, and I'm going to have to get one though, an Easy Pass. I want to go to the toll booth because I don't want them tracking my location. 3 times there was nobody at the toll booth. So now I'm going to have to either go online to pay, or I'm going to, get a letter in the mail, but it makes it, and 3 times. So I'm going to get 3 separate letters. I'm going to have to write 3 separate checks and put stamp,
And they photographed your license plate with a flock camera. That's, so you don't have the privacy anyway. Like you can't escape it.
Exactly. And now in the old days, when you didn't have somebody at the toll booth, you got to go through for free.
Right.
But now they make it very tedious because they want everybody to have that easy pass and be tracked. And so I don't think we should give the Trump administration a pass insofar as corralling us into maybe they're not putting us into 15-minute cities yet,
Right.
but they're corralling us in other ways because they can do it electronically with the Easy Pass.
Yes, and so many other points of surveillance. I mean, Erin Day has been really on this topic, and I'm in full agreement. They're just closing the net tighter and tighter.
Yes.
And it was sort of a little bit of a Trojan horse here, I think. But back to the farmers. Is there any hope that things might be able to be shifted back to smaller farms and to make them more competitive in farming so that they don't have to lose their property to large corporations and to foreign interests?
So on the one hand, there's nothing legislatively that is going to help them. Apart from a few crumbs, like more money for research into regenerative agriculture. But on the other hand, it's becoming much more expensive to not be an organic farmer, right? Because the inputs are so expensive. You see, an organic farmer can save seeds. A standard farmer can't. He's using these GMO seeds, has to buy them every year. He has to buy the fertilizer. The organic gardener is using green manures and other things, which aren't, free, but they are much cheaper than fertilizer. The farmer who isn't buying a new John Deere tractor that he can't fix himself, that's a big expense for these standard type farmers. Whereas the small organic farmer is unlikely to be able to shell out $300,000 for a John Deere, tractor.
It's totally electronic, and they can't.
Exactly, where he's basically renting it.
Right.
So I think there definitely is incentive now because of all these problems for more farmers to try at least part of their land to grow organically, to find out what that's like. It's more work. You don't have the crop insurance. It's not a guarantee, but it's cheaper and it's healthier. And so I think we'll probably see more farmers getting into organic and regenerative. And certainly the farmers who have been doing it for a while and know how are very anxious to help teach. So this is, there's a lot of models out there. And I'm learning too, as a gardener, there are new ideas. Like you plant your green manure crop very close together. You plant these things, and then you can plow them under, or you can just leave them there and knock them down to the side when the season is over, and then you can plant your other crops in between them. You can use them as a mulch, or you can turn them over and then let them, form the carbonaceous material in the soil. And sometimes, like I was doing oats and peas as a cover crop, a green manure. So the peas will actually fix nitrogen, and so I'll be adding nitrogen and carbon to my soil. In addition, what I've learned from Elliot Coleman is that if you put these carbon organic compounds into the soil, as they break down, they form acids, and those acids act on the bits of dirt, bits of minerals in the soil, and break down the edges of them and release all of these trace minerals that you need because of the acidification of the carbon compounds in the soil. So anyway, and Elliot Coleman is growing these long, tall, like maybe 6 foot tall, green manure crops that he's turning under, and he's probably plowing them under when they're that big. But these are new concepts. I mean, maybe the Indians, maybe people in the past had them, but it's not standard farming that many people have been doing. And There's another concept that's interesting, which is that the roots of crops give off compounds that are very important. And so instead of pulling, even whether it's green manure or your food, instead of pulling these crops up and then throwing them on the compost heap,
Mm-hmm.
you leave them in place and let those roots just degrade naturally in the soil, and that will be very beneficial to the soil. So anyway, I think there's hope that good things can happen, but I do encourage everybody to try to garden a little bit, especially learn how to do something like potatoes. Remember, when the Brits put their thumbs on the scale and tried to kill off a lot of Irish and Scottish,
Mm-hmm.
so England could take over those places and had. Um, the Irish that survived through growing potatoes. And when they had two very bad potato years and the British were taking a ton of taxes, that's when people were starving to death. And it's not that hard to grow potatoes, and you can grow them in almost every part of the country. So
And they're
do it.
really good when you grow them yourself.
Yes, they
I will
taste
say that
better.
it
Right.
tastes so much better.
And they're healthier. So I would encourage people, just try that. Take a piece of land and learn how to do it, and it's kind of fun. I love it. But then you don't have to worry so much. I know how to grow potatoes,
Right.
and my family will survive no matter what happens.
Right.
And kale's another one. Kale is very nutritious. So potatoes and kale.
And maybe
That's
a chicken or two.
yeah, right.
Well,
But that's more involved, if you're
right.
having animals. But you have to build a house for them, and a
Mm-hmm.
cage an area, and you have to move them around. I mean, that's a big deal. It's great to do it, but it's a big deal. But you can just plant a row of potatoes so that you know how. And if things
Right.
get bad, you
You,
will know how to survive. And
right.
kale also very easy to grow.
Right. And I,
And
I think,
you can harvest it for 6 months of the year,
yes, it's very
even
hardy.
in northern New England where I live.
And if you have an abundance, it's also, you can easily can it. I mean, I think
Mhm.
people are very nervous about canning, especially pressure canning. It is such an easy thing to do. You just follow the instructions and you do it. And then you have a whole larder full of canned vegetables that you grew yourself throughout the summer. I'm not a gardener. I'm the canner. My husband's the gardener. But yeah, it's nice. It does feel good to know how to provide for yourself a little bit. And it is not out of the question that there could be some, hard times coming given what is going on all around the world. So I liked the silver lining of maybe more people turning to organic and regenerative practices, even at the commercial farming level. And because you are the eternal optimist, as you have said, and that was, nice to hear. Do you want to say anything else about farming at this point, or do you want to pivot over a little bit to sort of a overview of the viral landscape, which is also not very a happy subject right now?
I would just encourage your listeners to pay attention, to go to a farmer's market, talk to farmers about how things are for them, get to understand this, because this is our food. It's very important. And the people in Washington, while they are centralizing control over it, are not actually helping. We're not growing more food. We're not growing more animals right now. The opposite is happening, and you want to make friends with your farmer, so that if there is a crunch, the farmer is going to sell to you before he's going to
Right.
sell to maybe everybody else. And you can buy manure from the farmer, perhaps. I mean, develop relationships. We have to help them, they have to help us. This is how everybody gets by in hard times, and it's how you can put down your anxiety over the future, because everybody's anxious about what the
Yeah.
future is going to hold. And when you're anxious, you can't think as clearly as normal.
Mhm.
And so find ways to get over the anxiety, take care of yourself. Yes, as Joni said, canning is quite easy, really. If you put these things in boiling water for a certain number of minutes, depending what it is you're canning, and you're not going to have botulism. Everything's going to be fine, and there's going to be food. You put the can in the basement and forget about it,
Right.
and it's there when you need it.
Right. And also just the process of getting to know your farmer and forming relationships, it also builds community. And maybe if you're not such a great farmer, there's something you can offer in return, and some barter can be had, which is the way community is built and resilient towns and cities are made, which we have not put a priority on that in the last, as far as my lifetime is concerned. I haven't seen it, although people are starting to talk about it, which I think is a hopeful thing. So,
Exactly.
yeah. Okay, so on to the topic of viruses. After the last 5 years of COVID, now we're starting to hear about other viruses that are supposedly emerging. Do you want to make any comments on the hantavirus situation, what's happening on Ebola, and maybe give a little of your perspective, because you have a great deal of expertise in this area and how things happen at the higher levels when an outbreak happens.
Well, how things happen at the higher levels is political decisions are made that have very little to do with the public health.
Right.
And so, unfortunately, so far, we've learned whether it's Ebola or COVID or, what was the other, Zika, we can't trust our public health officials to tell us the right thing. Okay, so for Hanta, I was wrong about Hanta. I said at the beginning, Hanta does not spread person to person. Don't worry about it. And in fact, Hanta in the United States does not spread person to person. In fact, there's only one strain of a hantavirus that anyone's ever heard of in the Andes, in Chile and Argentina, that has spread person to person, but not very readily, with difficulty. So, anyway, so in those countries, so hantavirus is usually transmitted by the droppings of rodents, mice,
Right.
rats, other rodents who are infected, and the droppings only stay infectious. The viral particles die in a few days, at the most a week. So you can clean out a garage, as I did last week, with mouse droppings, as long as they're not fresh, and you'll be fine. Don't worry. And you won't spread it to anybody. I'll repeat myself. There is no spread of hantavirus from person to person in the United States from any rodents we have. So this Andes form of hantavirus, there are about 300 known cases of it in South America. And of them, only about 300 are known to have been spread person to person. The other 90% were all from direct contact with rodent droppings. Okay?
And this is not right now. This is just historically. Those are the numbers.
Historically, right. Right now, they have this small outbreak on a ship, which it's all very questionable, but 3 people have died, and 1 woman in France is on life support getting ECMO. So extracorporeal membrane oxygenation means her lungs have failed. And what you have to do with people who have these viral infections, any severe viral infection, you just keep them alive until your body fights it off. And, it takes a while to make the T cells and the antibodies and the other substances you need to fight. But if you put somebody on ECMO, and this was also done for COVID and for other respiratory infections, you keep them alive for a few days, and then they start to get better. So if you have access to that kind of tertiary care, the survival rate will be high. But if you don't, the survival rate might be 30 to 40% of infected people may die if they don't have access to ICU level care. Okay, so for this particular strain, the Andes virus, there are, I believe, about 16 people now in a quarantine unit in Nebraska. The University of Nebraska built this big quarantine unit for the federal government, and it has been the place where you take people who may have been exposed to Ebola or Marburg or Nipah, something you're frightened of and is going to need tertiary care. So these people, there's 2 units. There's one is basically an ICU unit for people who actually have the infections. And there's also a quarantine unit for people who may come down with the infection that were exposed. So there's about 16 Americans in that unit. 2 were sent to a unit in Atlanta, CDC and Emory University managed. Turned out they did not have, there was some thought that they may have active clinical syndrome of hantavirus, but they didn't. One of them, and so they're now in Nebraska, and there's a few other people who got off that ship early that are in a few states, and they're being monitored at the state level. So remember, only in South America, only 10% of the cases of Andes hantavirus were spread person to person. Even if you shared an apartment or a home with someone who had it, there was only like a 10 to 20% chance you would come down with it. So it's not terribly contagious. Much less contagious than flu or measles or mumps or rubella. So Americans really shouldn't worry about it. It should not have been top of the page in the news for over a week. But I believe the reason that happened is because the World Health Organization's annual meeting started today. The World Health Organization has been looking for many billions of dollars, like 1 to 200 billion or more, to manage a worldwide pandemic preparedness program. And they've been trying to get this passed for the last 3 years, and it's been failing. They get a little tiny piece of it, but the nations haven't, especially African nations, have not gone along with it. The plan would require all the countries to do continuous surveillance of people and animals, establish laboratories. It's very involved and
very expensive,
and it very also expensive.
And it takes funding away from what they should be doing, which is just treating real disease on the ground in very poor countries.
Exactly.
With public health measures.
Yeah. So this is what the Africans are saying. If you are going to want us to put all this money into these things that affect very few people, is it going to come out of our tuberculosis and our malaria budget, right, or our vaccine budget or our school budget? So precisely. Thank you for bringing that up. So they haven't. So anyway, the WHO wants to convince the member states and their representatives that pandemic preparedness is tremendously important, and we should put it in the hands of the WHO, despite the fact they have failed every time to do a good job on previous Ebola outbreaks, on Zika, on COVID, et cetera. And so that's why Ebola is now perhaps that's why, maybe the Ebola would have been there anyway, but now that's also top of news. And that gets people going. Now, Ebola it doesn't transmit like COVID in the air. So if you're in a building, if you're in a room with somebody with Ebola and you are not getting splashed with a bodily fluid, or you get a bodily fluid on your glove and then you scratch your eye, your nose, or your mouth, that's how you get Ebola. And so if you are gowned and gloved up properly and you've got face covering and eye covering, you will be, and rubber boots, you will be okay, as long as you don't breach that protection. So nobody, again, Ebola is spread by bodily fluids. It doesn't go through the air unless, someone sprays you with their saliva. So we don't really have to worry about that in the United States. And all of the Ebola outbreaks actually eventually died out on their own. The one in West Africa grew very large. It was sort of ignored, but even when they're ignored, they eventually die out on their own. The UN and WHO in particular suffered 300 separate attacks of medical personnel in the Congo during the 2018-19 Ebola epidemic then, because instead of providing tertiary
violent attacks
by people in that nation on medical personnel, so-called medical personnel, because what WHO was doing was more of a policing action, trying to keep the poor Africans there so they didn't go out and spread it to us. And so that was not considered a very good public health. It might have been a good public health maneuver for us, but not for the people who actually had Ebola. So there were, the Lancet and Medicine Sans Frontières, there were tremendous criticisms of the way the WHO handled the last big Ebola epidemic. In
Sounds
the
more like a
same
lockdown.
region. It was, yeah, they tried to do a
Mhm.
lockdown. Lock you down with the people who have it, which is not what, of course, the people like us would want. I don't want to be locked down with these cases. So, in any event, we don't have to worry. None of these things are going to spread widely in the U.S. They never have. They never will. Um, and you'll see how they are being managed, these two epidemics, to try and get the nations to give the WHO the money it wants so that it can greatly expand both the activities that it performs,
Mhm.
and this is also part of the surveillance of us. So they
Right.
want to, I mean, if you look at the original documents for the two treaties that were proposed for the WHO, and neither one was passed in its original form, but they really wanted to basically take over global public health. So once the Director General of WHO declared a pandemic emergency, he could then tell all the nations that were affected what they could and could not do, even though he's not even a doctor, the one we have now.
Well,
And
he's not elected either. He's not
he's not
elected.
elected. Well, he's elected by representatives, but not
But
by
he's not elected by us. And
not by
things like that, which I don't think people fully appreciate. You give up all your national sovereignty, and the higher up the chain the decisions are made, the less any local impact can be had. You know,
exactly.
it's
And
so
Tedros
dangerous.
is taking his orders from Bill Gates, who is the biggest donor to the WHO, and Jeremy Farrar, who was a big donor. He was running the Wellcome Trust
Mhm.
for a number of years, and then he got moved to the WHO to try to bring these programs forward. And he was made the chief scientist, and now he is the number two guy, which means he's the brains behind the WHO policies. Well, where's he from? I think he's from MI5 or MI6. I think
Mm.
he's an intelligence agent with a medical degree who has been managing, so the Wellcome Trust is like the Gates Foundation of
Mhm.
England. It's
Mhm.
the biggest funder of medical research, and a lot of that medical research went to the biopreparedness
Mhm.
agenda and vaccines and vaccine mandates. So these people, Bill Gates, Jeremy Farrar, are not the people we want managing our public health. Even, Bill Gates has no degree. Jeremy Farrar has a medical degree, but he is not a doctor. He is a manager. He is a manager for the globalists to get
Mhm.
us all in line. And that's probably why they are spreading all this fear mongering out
Mhm.
to the public with Ebola and Hanta. Maybe
Mhm.
they'll come up with something else after that, but you don't have to worry about either of these. They will not be problematic in the United States.
And
Or
I'm not actually, I'm not worried about the virus. I'm worried about them and what they will do in the name of some kind of virus to us. And like I saw recently, or it was today or yesterday, Trump has restricted travel from one of the countries that has Ebola. I just saw a glancing pass at that, and I think I wonder if enough of these will add up. Will we start to see some restrictions? And somebody I was listening to said they're keeping a lot of things warm, and they're just waiting to see which one takes traction so they can get into another kind of reset, like
yes,
COVID was.
yes.
And and I don't think it's paranoid to be on the lookout for this.
Well, in India, Prime Minister Modi has called for
Mhm.
voluntary lockdowns, asked people to work
Right.
from home and not buy too much fertilizer.
And not
We
use
don't
too
have
much
enough
cooking
foreign
oil.
exchange. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So,
So
yeah, well, I mean, you never let a good,
crisis go to waste.
thank you.
Yes. Well,
And
before
then
we
you
wrap,
create a crisis,
pardon me?
and then you can create the crisis too.
Absolutely. Problem, and then you present the solution. So before we break, besides growing a garden and getting to know your farmer, do you have any other advice for people in these troubled times on how to live with a little serenity? Because you embody that. When been with you in person and when I listen to your talk and I read your excellent Substack, there's always a level of we can do something, and optimism. So anything you'd like to share on that?
Well, I started meditating at the age of 21. So and the kind that I did, which was Vipassana, taught me how my mind worked. I could watch my thoughts. And so it became clear that, worrying about things wasn't helpful, and that um, attitude was everything.
Mhm.
And if you could maintain the right attitude, you could have great success with what you were trying to accomplish, and you didn't let your emotions get the better of you. Anyway, but it took me years to get to that, many years, decades to get to that point. So I don't expect people to get there right away, but if you can, if that seems like a valuable lesson to learn how you think, to learn meditation, and to not let your mind run away with it. Your mind will do all kinds of funny things to you, and you don't have to let it.
I don't know anything about that personally, not me. So
S I think also, I have faith in God or the universe. I do believe that there are good forces out there that are trying to help us. I believe that I could not have the success I've had unless these forces were feeding me. I'm not smart enough. I don't have enough energy. But I am helped to get the right information that I need, and I feel that we all are. And if we can try to get attuned to that, see when intuition is coming to you, if you can figure out how that information comes in, and attune with it, you will have a much, much, much better life. And if you just trust, and also if you feel like this isn't the be all and end all, okay, everyone's going to die. Maybe there's reincarnation. Maybe there's something else. We don't know what. But if we have faith that if you're a good person, you're trying to do good, trying to make sense of the world, you'll be taken care of. That you're not going to go to hell for that. If you believe in hell or whatever you believe, if you believe in reincarnation, you're not going to have a bad reincarnation if you try to do good all the time. So it's a good reason to do good and get yourself in the habit. And so I don't have any worries really.
it's really great and inspiring, and it's a lesson I absolutely need to hear right now, because I've been focusing a little too much on all the stuff being thrown at us and not taking a moment and just letting my monkey brain settle down. So thank you for that. Meryl, where can people find you?
So I have a Substack, Meryl's Chaos Newsletter, and I do 3 shows on Children's Health Defense TV every month. I'll be doing actually 2 this week. No, one tomorrow, and I'll be filming one this week, which will be shown the next week. So that's where you can find me, and you can try Googling me or looking for me on Twitter, but I am censored, so you probably won't find a whole lot.
Okay, I will put those in the show notes along with the New Hampshire Farm Bill, so that people can lift that language and send it to their own representatives at the state level.
Thanks a ton.
All right.
Jenny.
Thank you, Meryl. Thank you for doing this. Good to see you.
Same here. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.